Here are the unspeakable realities of slavery in ancient Greece. Picture a time of grand philosophers and majestic temples, where the glories of civilization masked a dark secret. Slaves, unseen and unheard, toiled in misery. What did their lives entail? Let's peel back the layers and reveal the harrowing truth. Chapter 1. The Invisible Chains. Daily life of a Greek slave. Imagine waking up to the sound of your master's voice, not an alarm clock. You've got a list of chores that would make Hercules break a sweat. As a slave, your breakfast isn't a choice between avocado toast or a smoothie. It's whatever scraps your master tosses your way, if you're lucky. You have dreams of running away, but the ever-watchful eyes of your master and the threat of harsh punishment keep you grounded. Slaves in Greece weren't just laborers. They were the invisible hands building the grand structures, yet they couldn't take pride in their work. You're tasked with cleaning the master's house, but the filth of injustice can never be scrubbed away. In Greek households, slaves were the unsung heroes of the kitchen, cooking meals they could only dream of tasting. When you're sick, there's no doctor visit. You either get better on your own or you don't. You've heard of other slaves being sold away like cattle, a constant reminder that you could be next. Entertainment? Forget about it. Your life is a never-ending grind, with no weekend binge-watching sessions to look forward to. You might think about rebelling, but the story of Spartacus is a cautionary tale. Rebellion is a path paved with corpses. While the citizens enjoy their freedoms, you're left to wonder what freedom even feels like. Greek slaves were often forced to wear chains or collars, not as a fashion statement, but as a mark of their status. Education is a privilege. For a slave, knowledge is a forbidden fruit, always out of reach. Your master's whims dictate your life. One day you could be scrubbing floors, the next serving as entertainment at a symposium. Speaking of symposiums, if you do attend, it's to serve the wine, not drink it. Slaves were the silent labor force behind Greek art, but they couldn't express their own creativity. The penalty for disobedience was harsh. Flogging was a common punishment, leaving scars that told the story of your suffering. You might care for the children of your master, but your own children can be sold away without a second thought. Even in death, there's no dignity. Slaves often lacked proper burials, their bodies discarded like trash. Religious festivals, a time of joy for citizens, were just another day of work for you. While citizens debated philosophy, you pondered your next meal, the disparity stark and cruel. The hardest part, knowing that you are considered property, less than human in the eyes of the law. Your spirit yearns for freedom, but the chains of reality keep you bound. You hear tales of slaves being freed, but these stories are rare, and freedom is a distant dream. Some slaves tried to earn their freedom by saving money, a slow and grueling process. Trust is a luxury. Betrayal could come from fellow slaves trying to gain favor with the master. Every day is a struggle for survival, a constant battle against despair. The legacy of your suffering is erased from history, your story untold. Even as the Greeks achieve greatness, your existence is a reminder of the darkness beneath their glory. The ultimate irony. While Greeks celebrated democracy, they upheld a system of slavery that contradicted their ideals. How do you think these invisible chains of the past continue to echo in our present? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Chapter 2. The brutal reality. Punishments and rebellion. Picture this. You're caught stealing bread because you were starving. The punishment? A brutal flogging that leaves you scarred for life. Runaways were hunted down like animals, often branded or mutilated to prevent further escape attempts. Rebellion wasn't just frowned upon. It was met with extreme violence, a bloody warning to others. Punishments were public, serving as a grim spectacle to instill fear in the slave population. Slaves caught conspiring were often executed, their bodies displayed as a deterrent. Masters could impose arbitrary punishments, from beatings to starvation, with no recourse for the slaves. You've heard stories of slaves being thrown into pits or chained in dungeons, a fate worse than death. In some cases, slaves were forced to fight in brutal games for their master's amusement. The psychological torture was just as severe, with constant threats of punishment looming over your head. Even minor infractions could result in severe beatings, a reminder of your powerless position. Slaves who displeased their masters were often sold to harsher owners as punishment. Rebellions were rare and often crushed mercilessly, with survivors facing horrific retribution. The story of Spartacus, though inspiring, ended in crucifixion for many of his followers. Harsh winters and scorching summers didn't excuse you from work. Falling behind meant punishment. Even attempting to learn to read or write could result in severe penalties, knowledge being a forbidden power. Masters used psychological tactics, pitting slaves against each other to prevent unity. Public punishments were designed to break your spirit, ensuring total submission. The fear of punishment was a constant companion, a shadow that never left your side. Stories of slaves being whipped to death were not uncommon, a grim reality of your existence. The concept of justice didn't apply to slaves. The master's word was law. Some slaves were forced to wear metal collars inscribed with the master's name, a dehumanizing mark of ownership. Attempting to flee often meant facing brutal reprisals, not just for you, but for any slave who aided you. Slaves who fought back during punishment faced even harsher retribution, a vicious cycle of violence. You lived in constant fear of the master's mood, which dictated the severity of your day. Even acts of kindness were rare and often followed by suspicion or further punishment. Masters could legally kill their slaves without facing any repercussions, a terrifying power over life and death. The physical and psychological scars of punishment never healed, a permanent reminder of your suffering. Slaves were often forced to punish each other, a cruel tactic to break bonds and create mistrust. The hope of escape was a dangerous dream, often ending in capture and brutal punishment. The reality of rebellion was bleak, with few success stories and many tales of horrific reprisals. What does the brutal treatment of slaves in ancient Greece tell us about the darker side of human nature? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Chapter 3. The Dark Bargain. Economic exploitation. Slaves were the backbone of the Greek economy, but their contributions were erased from history. You worked the fields, but the fruits of your labor filled the master's coffers, not your belly. The economic system thrived on your exploitation, with no hope of financial freedom for you. Skilled slaves, like artisans or blacksmiths, generated significant wealth for their masters, with none for themselves. You could be rented out like a tool, your labor sold to the highest bidder, while you received nothing. Slaves were often used in dangerous jobs, with high mortality rates and little concern for safety. The wealth of Greek cities was built on the backs of slaves, a hidden truth beneath the grandeur. Some slaves were forced to work in mines, facing horrific conditions and a short, brutal life expectancy. Your skills were exploited without compensation, a stark contrast to the free citizens who profited from your work. The economic disparity was glaring, with slaves living in squalor while their labor enriched their masters. Slaves could be bought and sold like livestock, with prices reflecting their perceived economic value. Your economic worth was determined by your physical strength or specific skills, reducing you to a commodity. Even children born to slaves were destined for the same fate, a cycle of economic exploitation. Slaves were often forced to produce luxury goods, enjoying none of the wealth or comfort they created. You might work in a bustling marketplace, but all the transactions benefited your master, not you. The economic system was designed to keep you in perpetual servitude, with no escape from the cycle of exploitation. While citizens debated economic theories, you lived the harsh reality of exploitation every day. Some slaves managed to save enough to buy their freedom, but this was a rare and difficult feat. The economic dependency on slavery was a dark secret of Greek prosperity, rarely acknowledged in their history. Your economic contributions were immense, but your existence was barely noted in historical records. Slaves in the household economy did everything from cooking to cleaning, yet received no economic benefit. The disparity between the wealth you created and your living conditions was stark and cruel. Economic exploitation extended beyond physical labor to intellectual contributions, with no recognition for slaves. The economic engine of Greece ran on the forced labor of slaves, a fact hidden behind their celebrated achievements. Even in death, your economic value was considered, with masters often ensuring their slaves like property. The economic system was rigged against you, ensuring that your hard work only benefited your masters. You might dream of a better life, but the economic chains were as strong as the physical ones. Slaves were often excluded from economic transactions, forced to watch others benefit from their labor. The legacy of economic exploitation is a dark stain on the history of ancient Greece, often glossed over. Your story is one of economic sacrifice, a hidden force behind the grandeur of Greek civilization. How do you think the economic exploitation of slaves in ancient Greece impacts our understanding of their society? Leave your comments below. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Society: Cultural and Social Implications. Slavery was ingrained in Greek society, a norm that few questioned and many justified. You were an integral part of the household, yet invisible in social gatherings and cultural narratives. The Greek concept of democracy excluded you, a cruel irony given your essential role in the society. Slaves were often seen as inferior beings, a social stigma that dehumanized you completely. Your presence in Greek tragedies and comedies was usually as a foil to highlight the virtues of free citizens. Socially, you were at the bottom rung, with no rights or recognition beyond your utility. The cultural achievements of Greece were built on the silent suffering of slaves, a hidden truth. Slavery was justified through philosophical arguments, a chilling rationalization of your suffering. Your identity was erased. You were a tool, not a person, in the eyes of society. Social norms dictated that you could be punished or killed without repercussion, a terrifying power imbalance. Cultural festivals and religious rites often excluded slaves, a stark reminder of your social status. Your stories and experiences were rarely recorded, lost to history like whispers in the wind. The social hierarchy was rigid, with no upward mobility for slaves, trapping you in a life of servitude. Even in death, your social status followed you. Slaves were often buried without ceremony or respect. Social interactions were dictated by your status. You could never be an equal in the eyes of free citizens. The culture of honor and shame in Greece further marginalized slaves, embedding social prejudices. Your suffering was often invisible, a silent agony that society chose to ignore. Socially, you were a ghost, present but unnoticed, contributing to a society that refused to acknowledge your humanity. Even in art and literature, slaves were portrayed as lesser beings, reinforcing social biases. The concept of hospitality, so cherished in Greek culture, rarely extended to slaves. You lived in constant fear of social reprisal, with no support system or community to turn to. Socially, you were isolated, with your family often torn apart by the whims of your masters. The social implications of slavery extended to every aspect of your life, a constant reminder of your position. Cultural norms reinforced your subjugation, with no avenue for resistance or change. The social fabric of Greece was woven with the threads of slavery, a dark truth behind their celebrated achievements. Your presence in society was essential yet unacknowledged, a silent contributor to the cultural legacy of Greece. Socially, you were an outcast, a status that followed you in life and death. The cultural achievements of Greece were built on a foundation of suffering and exploitation, a bitter legacy. The social norms of Greece justified your dehumanization, a chilling reminder of the cruelty of societal structures. Your story is one of silent suffering, a hidden truth behind the grandeur of ancient Greek society. What do the social and cultural implications of slavery in ancient Greece tell us about their society's true nature? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And that's it from this video. See you in the next one.